1814, a year when Europe still trembled from the aftershocks of Napoleon's wars, when villages across Bavaria clung desperately to faith as their only shield against famine, disease, and despair. In one such village, small enough to be overlooked, on maps something began that could not be explained by faith nor by reason. It began in a single cottage with a single child. Her name was Anna Weiss. At first glance she was unremarkable, a girl of 12, slight of frame, with pale hair that caught the winter light like strands of frost. She helped her mother carry water. She sang softly while mending clothes, and she bowed her head in prayer each evening. Yet whispers soon gathered around her, whispers that would spread through the valley like smoke, choking all who heard them. For Anna's voice was not singular. It was many. At first it was subtle. Her parents claimed they heard a faint undertone, a strange shadow within her speech, as though another voice lingered beneath her own. Soon, neighbors began to notice. When Anna spoke, there came not one tone but several, sometimes layered, sometimes distinct, sometimes in languages she had never learned. One was guttural, resonant, unnervingly masculine. Another was soft, melodic, almost angelic. A third was eerily identical to Father Matthias, a priest buried the previous winter. Villagers swore they heard the deceased man's voice carried on the lips of a living child. Curiosity turned to dread. Families gathered beneath Anna's window, at night, straining to hear what they later called a chorus inside one throat. They argued over what it meant. The church declared it blasphemy, a sign of possession, the devil mocking creation through a child's body. Physicians from nearby towns, bound by the shaky foundations of early psychiatry, muttered of hysteria, of mental illness, of moral insanity, a term just beginning to enter their vocabulary. Neighbors, clutching their rosaries with trembling hands, whispered an older word: witchcraft. Yet none of these explanations captured what the villagers saw with their own eyes. Anna did not imitate, she did not pretend. Each voice had rhythm, cadence, personality, too vivid, too precise to dismiss. A child's mouth produced conversations between the living and the dead, arguments that seemed to echo from a place beyond comprehension. Was Anna Weiss merely an extraordinary mimic, her mind fractured by trauma into unrecognizable pieces? Or was her throat a doorway, borrowed by something darker, something desperate to be heard? Her story survives not in clarity but in contradiction, resting uneasily between psychology and religion, innocence and corruption, fact and myth. More than 2 centuries later, the mystery remains unsolved. For perhaps the voices died with Anna, or perhaps they are still waiting, patient and restless, to speak again. The origins of the Anna Weiss case do not begin with voices echoing through a cottage or villagers swearing they heard the dead speak. They begin quietly, in the rhythm of ordinary life, the kind of life so common in early 19th century Bavaria that it seemed almost invisible. Anna was born in 1802, the second daughter of Marcus and Greta Weiss, in a valley where forests pressed close against farmland and superstition clung to the air like smoke. Her family lived modestly. Marcus worked as a cooper, shaping barrels, for vineyards and merchants, while Greta tended the house, cared for their children, and prayed daily with a devotion that seemed to hold the fragile household together. Life was hard yet not extraordinary, and Anna at first was not extraordinary either. She was pale-haired, soft-voiced, prone to long silences, but not unlike the other children of the village. Neighbors recalled her as watchful rather than playful, a girl who preferred to listen rather than speak. She followed her mother into the fields, lingered near the well, and sometimes sang to herself in the evenings, simple songs that carried strangely through the air. She sang before she spoke, Greta once confided to a priest, remembering how as an infant Anna had hummed instead of crying. It seemed harmless then, even endearing. But in hindsight, many wondered whether it had been the first sign. The village was steeped in both faith and fear. Though devoutly Catholic, the people carried older beliefs, half-buried superstitions that rose to the surface whenever illness struck or harvests failed. A calf born with twisted legs was whispered, to be cursed. A child's sudden fever might be the devil's punishment. Families clutched rosaries with the same desperation that once drove their ancestors to burn witches. It was a world in which a strange child could never remain merely strange. She became a question, one that demanded answers. As Anna grew, small peculiarities unsettled her parents. She often played alone, murmuring as though conversing with unseen companions. Greta would scold her for talking to herself, only to hear Anna whisper back, "I'm not talking to myself, they're talking to me." At first it was dismissed as childish imagination. After all, lonely children invent friends to keep them company. Yet there was something about the way Anna responded, pausing as though listening, nodding as if to an invisible speaker, that chilled those who watched. By the age of 7, the whispers grew stranger. Her mother might think privately, "Where did I leave the broom?" And Anna, without looking up, would answer aloud, "Behind the door." Greta told herself it was coincidence that her daughter was merely observant. But when Anna began replying to unspoken questions with details she could not possibly know, fear took root. Marcus attempted to reason it away, insisting children notice more than adults assume. But even he grew uneasy when Anna began repeating entire sentences of his thoughts. It was as though the line between his mind and her mouth had been erased. The villagers noticed too. One child claimed Anna had predicted her father's return from war, describing in eerie detail the limp he would carry after a wound in battle. Weeks later the man appeared, limping exactly as Anna had said. Another neighbor swore Anna once answered a question he had only thought in silence. These stories spread through the valley like infection, twisting into rumor into dread. Soon mothers pulled their children away from her, and fathers muttered about curses. By the time she was 12, the whispers inside Anna seemed to have multiplied. She began speaking in voices layered over her own, sometimes contradicting, her words sometimes mocking, sometimes providing knowledge she should not have possessed. At supper she might answer her father in a high melodic tone not her own. At Mass she once recited prayers in Latin, though she had never been taught the language. On another occasion, she shocked an entire gathering by speaking fluent French, warning a traveling merchant of misfortune. He later swore her voice had been identical to that of his deceased brother. These incidents hardened suspicion. Was she merely imitating, or had something entered her? The village priest, Father Joseph, recalled accounts of possession from church texts and grew convinced Anna's home was defiled. He wrote in his records that the devil is clever, but the innocence of a child is his most blasphemous disguise. Greta, horrified by such claims, begged that her daughter be treated as ill, not cursed. But early physicians had little language to describe what they observed. They spoke of moral insanity, an emerging term for conditions that fractured personality, a crude precursor to what modern psychology might call schizophrenia or dissociative identity disorder. To the priests, Anna was a soul under siege. To the doctors, she was a mind unraveling. To her neighbors, she was something worse, an omen. They watched her from behind curtains, whispered about shadows near her window, crossed themselves when she passed. She became both pitied and feared, both a child and a monster in their eyes. Yet beneath all the suspicion, one fact bound the testimonies together. Her voices were too real. They were not childish imitations, nor playful mimicry. Each carried its own cadence, its own rhythm, its own personality. One voice was mocking, cruel, quick to laughter. Another was sorrowful, almost weeping. Another was commanding, low and stern. And when the villagers swore they heard the voice of their late priest or a dead relative, the question darkened beyond imagination. Was Anna's mind inventing personas, or was something else speaking through her? The village itself became a stage for competing explanations. On one side stood the church invoking ancient rites, certain the devil had found a foothold. On the other side stood science in its infancy, men fumbling for terms and categories that could explain the unexplainable. Between them stood Anna, silent one moment, then echoing with voices not her own the next. What made the phenomenon so unsettling was not only the sound of the voices, but the knowledge they carried. Anna would sometimes reveal secrets, sins, confessed privately, thoughts never spoken, memories hidden away, a farmer's guilt over stealing grain, a woman's private grief over a stillborn child. These revelations cut deeper than mimicry, forcing villagers to confront whether they were being watched by God, haunted by the devil, or dissected by a mind capable of impossible perception. Her parents, torn between faith and fear, did not know where to turn. Marcus demanded doctors examine her, hoping for medicine, reason, anything to free his daughter from whispers of witchcraft. Greta, more devout, turned to prayer, clutching rosaries until her hands bled. Their household, once simple, became a battleground of doubt. Each night they listened as Anna's room filled with murmurs, as if multiple people conversed where only one child lay. Marcus would barge in, demanding silence only to find Anna asleep, lips moving without sound. Greta swore she sometimes heard voices continue after Anna's mouth had closed. The whispers spread beyond the family and the village. Travelers carried stories to nearby towns. Some scoffed, dismissing them as exaggerations born of rural superstition. Others grew curious, eager to see the child themselves. A few returned with shaken faces, insisting they had heard something that no explanation could contain. Slowly, Anna's name began to surface in clerical reports, in physician journals, in tavern gossip, transforming from child into legend. But what is most chilling about her origins is how ordinary they were. She was not born under a blood moon. She did not grow up surrounded by violence or chaos. She was, in every practical sense, an ordinary child, until she was not. That contrast, between innocence and evil, between a girl playing with fabric scraps in a cottage and a girl channeling voices beyond comprehension, is what gave the story its power. It left villagers with no safe conclusion. If such darkness could arise in Anna, it could arise in anyone. The world of 1814 was unprepared for such contradictions. The church saw the devil because it had no other language for 7 voices in one throat. The physicians spoke of moral insanity because their understanding of the mind had only just begun. And the villagers, caught between these poles, saw what they feared most: evidence that their fragile world of prayer and labor was not safe from intrusion by forces they could neither name nor fight. Thus, the origins of the phenomenon cannot be traced to a single moment, but to a gradual unraveling. A child who hummed before she spoke, who whispered before she shouted, who carried within her not one voice but many. Each step seemed innocent, until it was no longer possible to dismiss. Each explanation seemed plausible until it was contradicted by another. And so Anna Weiss stood at the threshold of 2 worlds, neither fully claimed by medicine nor fully surrendered to religion, but existing in the uneasy space where both faltered. Her story would only grow darker from here, for if the origins were unsettling, the escalation would be terrifying. Voices that once whispered would soon mock priests in their own tongue. Languages unlearned would pour from her lips. Night after night, neighbors would hear conversations that no child should have been capable of. And every attempt to explain her would fracture against the same unyielding question: were these 7 voices the echoes of a broken mind, or the intrusion of something unspeakably real? The strange whispers inside Anna Weiss's cottage might have remained a private family affliction, spoken of only in hushed tones by her parents, had it not been for the ears of the village. In every haunting, there is a moment when private fear spills into public knowledge. For Anna, that moment came when others began to listen, when strangers heard for themselves the uncanny voices that no longer belonged to just a child. These first witnesses would become the foundation of the legend, each adding their account, their interpretation, their fear. And as their stories spread, the village itself became a stage, with Anna at its center. The earliest testimony came from the most ordinary source, a farmer named Ulrich Bauer. One autumn evening, he passed the Weiss cottage on his way home from tending livestock. The sun had already set, and the air was heavy with the smell of wood smoke. He heard singing, melodic, strong, not the trembling voice of a child, but the resonant baritone of a grown man. Curious, he stopped. The voice recited what sounded like Latin scripture. Ulrich, though uneducated, recognized fragments from the mass he attended weekly. Shocked, he lingered until Greta Weiss stepped outside, startled to find him listening. When he asked who had been inside, Greta answered hesitantly, "Only Anna." Ulrich swore to this until his death. "It was no child," he told neighbors. "I heard a priest's voice clear as the bells of the church. Some dismissed him as fanciful, but many believed him. His testimony carried weight because he had nothing to gain, no motive to invent such a tale." From that night forward, whispers of Anna's voices grew louder than the songs she was accused of singing. Soon others came forward. A widow named Martha claimed that during a visit, she heard Anna speak in a tone that mirrored her late husband's voice. It was not merely the sound, she insisted, but the peculiar phrasing he alone used. When Anna, in that same voice, reminded Martha of a private moment known only to the couple, the widow fainted on the spot. Some said grief made her hear what she wished to hear. Others argued grief sharpened her memory, making the recognition more damning. A traveling merchant passing through the valley offered another chilling account. He had stopped at the Weiss home to rest and trade. Anna, sitting quietly near the hearth, suddenly erupted in a guttural male voice, cursing him in fluent French. Startled, the merchant confronted Marcus, who swore his daughter had never been exposed to the language. Later in the tavern, the merchant retold the story with such conviction that the entire room fell silent. "It was not imitation," he said. "It was hatred. It was knowledge. No child could have spoken so." With each testimony, the boundaries of possibility stretched further. If Anna could summon the voice of a priest, a husband, a stranger's brother, then who, or what, was she truly echoing? The village began dividing itself into camps. Some saw her as possessed, an instrument of blasphemy. Others saw her as touched by God, a miraculous vessel channeling voices from the beyond. Still others, less devout but no less fearful, believed she was cursed, her very presence a danger to crops, livestock, and souls. Priests soon documented their own encounters. Father Joseph, already uneasy from earlier reports, visited the Weiss household to observe. During prayer, Anna's mouth twisted and a deep, mocking voice recited scripture backward. Witnesses swore her eyes rolled back, her small frame trembling as though two beings wrestled within her. Father Joseph later recorded in his journal that the child's body is but a mask. What speaks through her is profane, cunning, and unholy. Another priest, visiting weeks later, noted that Anna responded to questions with knowledge of church law she could never have studied. To them, this was no madness. It was infestation. But not all priests agreed. A younger cleric, Father Lucas, believed hysteria infected both Anna and her witnesses. He pointed out that people heard what they expected. The grieving widow longed for her husband's voice, the devout farmer anticipated scripture. Faith distorts memory, he warned, yet his caution was drowned out by louder, more fearful voices. At night, the village bore its own testimonies. Families living near the Weiss home reported hearing laughter drifting from her window. It was not the giggle of a child, but something louder, older, crueler. Some swore the laughter continued even after Greta swore Anna had fallen asleep. One man claimed he heard two distinct voices arguing inside her room, though Marcus had been away, and Greta was certain no visitor had entered. Fear thickened until even those who had never heard Anna's voices claimed they could. Fear has a way of multiplying itself. One woman insisted her cow produced sour milk after Anna brushed its flank. Another declared her infant fell ill after playing with Anna. Superstition wrapped itself around every misfortune, binding Anna at its center, and yet not all accounts were drenched in terror. A small group of villagers began to interpret her as a living miracle. To them, she was proof that the soul continued after death, that voices from heaven could be heard through a chosen vessel. They defended her, sometimes violently, against accusations of witchcraft. The witnesses themselves became part of the haunting. Each retelling of their encounters shaped the narrative, sharpening Anna into either a prophet or a monster. It was no longer merely about what she said or did, but about what others remembered and feared. One could argue that Anna did not haunt the villagers haunted themselves with her image. As accounts accumulated, Skeptics raised the possibility of fabrication. Could Ulrich have mistaken a song for Latin? Could Martha's grief have conjured her husband's voice from a child's mumble? Could the merchant have exaggerated for attention in a tavern? The possibility of mass hysteria hovered like a shadow. After all, the more people believed Anna capable of such voices, the more likely they were to interpret ordinary sounds as extraordinary. A cough became a curse, a murmur became a prophecy. Yet the consistency of certain details unsettled even the skeptics. Witness after witness swore Anna's voices were distinct, not childish mimicry, but fully formed personalities. Witness after witness insisted she spoke languages she had never learned. Even skeptics struggled to explain how a 12-year-old without access to books or teachers could summon Latin, French, and complex scripture with fluency. Coincidence, exaggeration, suggestion, none seemed sufficient. Thus, the division deepened. Some avoided the Weiss home entirely, fearing contamination of soul or mind. Others crowded near, eager to glimpse the child, to hear a voice that might confirm their doubts or affirm their faith. The village transformed into a theater, with Anna performing unwillingly at its heart. Each night more claimed to hear voices, drifting across the fields. Each morning stories spread further, woven with fear, embroidered with faith, amplified by the hunger of human imagination. And Anna herself? She became almost secondary in her own tale. To her parents she remained a child, sometimes frightened, sometimes detached, often exhausted. To her neighbors, she was no longer Anna Weiss but a vessel, a cipher, a mirror reflecting their fears and desires. Whether she whispered, shouted, or stayed silent, the village heard what it needed to hear. By the winter of 1814, the phenomenon could no longer be dismissed as family gossip. Eyewitness testimony had multiplied into dozens of accounts. Priests documented her in church records. Travelers carried tales to distant towns. Anna Weiss was no longer merely a strange child in a Bavarian village. She was a legend in the making, her identity rewritten by every witness who swore they had heard the impossible. And so the line blurred between truth and fabrication. Was Anna truly speaking with voices not her own? Or was she a mirror for hysteria, grief, and superstition? Were villagers hearing the extraordinary, or only themselves? In the end, it hardly mattered. For once the first witnesses spoke, the legend could not be unsaid. It grew, breathed, and echoed, as alive as the voices they swore they had heard. By the winter of 1815, the story of Anna Weiss had outgrown the boundaries of her Bavarian village. What began as a curious whisper about a strange little girl had now become a matter of deep concern for the Catholic Church, and an irresistible puzzle for the emerging world of medical science. Her body had become the battleground, her voice the weapon, and her soul or mind the prize claimed by both faith and reason. The Church arrived first. A delegation of priests, summoned after Father Joseph's increasingly frantic letters, descended upon the Weiss household. They came in black cassocks carrying crucifixes, holy water, and leather-bound manuals filled with centuries-old rites. Their purpose was simple: to determine if what the villagers claimed was true possession, and if so, to drive out the demons inhabiting the girl. To them, Anna's case bore unmistakable signs of infestation. Her guttural voices, her uncanny knowledge of Scripture, her mocking laughter during Mass, all echoed the accounts of possessed children chronicled in Catholic history. To deny it, they argued, was to deny the devil's hand in human affairs. But where the priests saw the devil, the physicians saw an opportunity. German medicine was still in its infancy, yet new ideas about the mind were spreading through Europe like wildfire. Physicians from Munich and Augsburg traveled to witness Anna's condition. They spoke of moral insanity, of hysteria, of fractured consciousness. Some even speculated that Anna's voices were early signs of what would later be called multiple personality disorder. For them, Anna was not a spiritual battlefield, but a living case study, a child who could expand the horizons of medical knowledge. Thus, in candlelit rooms where Anna sat trembling, the two worlds collided. Priests demanded prayer. Doctors demanded observation. Priests anointed her with oil, commanding demons to reveal their names. Doctors asked her questions, noting how her voices shifted tone, language, and memory. At times, both sides were present in the same room, their arguments rising louder than Anna's own cries. To watch her was to watch faith and reason lock horns, neither side yielding, both certain of their truth. The church's position was unshakable. Each of Anna's 7 voices, they insisted, was a demon masquerading as a human soul. One was mocking, one was blasphemous, one pretended to be a priest, another a long-dead villager. Demons were known to mimic the dead, they explained, to lure the faithful into believing they spoke with their loved ones. To the priests, Anna's fluency in Latin or French was no miracle of the mind but evidence of preternatural knowledge, proof that spirits, not science, were at work. The physicians, however, countered with equal conviction. They argued that Anna's voices were not demons but fragments of herself, splintered by trauma or hidden desires. Some speculated that her strict religious upbringing, steeped in confession and sin, had fractured her young psyche. Perhaps the voices were aspects of her own subconscious erupting into speech because her conscious mind could not contain them. Others pointed to the pressures of poverty, isolation, and parental expectation, suggesting that Anna's condition was born of a childhood too heavy for one girl to carry. Yet both sides stumbled on the same obstacle: knowledge. Anna's voices spoke of things she could not have known. Intimate details of villagers' lives, complex scripture passages, foreign words and phrases. Priests pointed to these as proof of demonic deception. Doctors, embarrassed, whispered about hidden memory, cryptomnesia, or coincidence. Neither explanation satisfied. The more Anna spoke, the more the mystery deepened. For the villagers, the clash of church and science was less a debate than a spectacle. They crowded outside the Vice cottage during examinations, straining to hear through the walls. Some carried rosaries, others notebooks. All wanted to know, was Anna a child of God tormented by hell or a medical marvel who proved the mind was deeper than anyone imagined? Families split down the middle. Husbands mocked their wives for believing in demons. Wives accused their husbands of blasphemy for doubting the church. Anna became a mirror, reflecting the divisions of an age standing between superstition and science. The priests conducted formal rituals. Anna was sprinkled with holy water, commanded to renounce Satan. Sometimes she screamed, clawing at her own skin, her voice dropping into a register no 12-year-old should have been capable of producing. Other times she laughed in mockery, reciting prayers backward or twisting them into vulgarity. For the priests, these were classic signs. They noted each in their journals, writing that her case aligns with the ancient accounts of diabolical possession. Still, Anna never reacted in predictable ways. Sometimes she sat silent, staring at the floor as if she heard nothing at all. Sometimes she fell asleep mid-prayer. At least once, she collapsed into unconsciousness, her lips still moving, her throat still producing a voice that could not have been hers. The doctors, too, took their notes. They described her symptoms clinically: sudden shifts in tone, rapid mood swings, apparent amnesia between voices. They compared her to earlier cases of hysteria recorded in Paris. Some even speculated that her condition foreshadowed theories Freud would later make famous, that repressed trauma could manifest as alternate personalities, each carrying fragments of memory and emotion. They marveled at how the human mind could fracture, how it could house multiple selves in one body. To them, Anna was not a battlefield of angels and demons, but an undiscovered continent of psychology. But here lay the cruelest irony. In their battle to define her, neither side listened to Anna herself. She was spoken over, prayed over, diagnosed over. Rarely was she asked what she felt. When she did speak in her own voice, she often described confusion. She did not remember what her voices said. Sometimes she recalled them faintly, as though overhearing a stranger in another room. Other times she wept, insisting she wanted them to stop. To the church, these were cries of a soul under siege. To the doctors, they were evidence of mental illness. But to Anna, they were simply her reality, a nightmare from which she could not wake. As months passed, the conflict deepened. Priests pressured her parents to allow a full exorcism, convinced delay would only strengthen the demons. Physicians pushed for extended observation in a city hospital, arguing that exposure to modern treatment could illuminate her condition. Marcus and Greta were torn. To surrender her to the church meant subjecting their daughter to violent rites. To surrender her to the doctors meant sending her far from home, into sterile halls where strangers would dissect her mind. Whichever choice they made, Anna would not be Anna anymore. She would be a case, a battlefield, an experiment. The wider world took notice. Pamphlets circulated, some written by priests warning of demonic infiltration, others by physicians describing a new frontier of mental illness. Intellectuals debated in coffee houses. Was Anna proof of the supernatural or of the mind's hidden architecture? Some saw in her the eternal battle between good and evil. Others saw the dawn of psychology as a true science. Her body became symbolic, her suffering transformed into metaphor for a society at war with itself. And yet, amidst all the theory and argument, the voices continued. They emerged at night, startling Greta awake. They interrupted meals, leaving Marcus trembling with shame and fear. They echoed in the village, convincing neighbors that curses were being cast. Nothing, neither holy water nor medical notes, stopped them. Anna remained caught between worlds, too strange to be explained, too human to be dismissed. What is? Most chilling, perhaps, is how her case blurred the very lines it was meant to clarify. Priest recorded instances where her voices revealed private sins, secrets only confessed in the dark of the confessional. How could Anna have known? Doctors offered no explanation. Physicians noted that Anna sometimes displayed knowledge of anatomy or philosophy she could not have encountered. Priests had no answer. Each side saw what confirmed their truth, yet both were left unsettled by what did not fit. The debate over Anna Weiss became a parable of its time. On one side, the church, ancient and unyielding, clung to a worldview where every shadow concealed a demon. On the other side, science, young and ambitious, insisted the mind itself was a labyrinth waiting to be mapped. In the middle sat a child, her body trembling, her voice fractured, her soul, or psyche, claimed by both but owned by neither. By the spring of 1816, exhaustion consumed the Weiss family. Anna was thinner, her eyes ringed with shadows. Villagers no longer gossiped, they argued. Was she a prophet, a fraud, or a lunatic? Was she chosen or cursed? Priests demanded another exorcism. Doctors demanded further study. The Weiss parents demanded only peace. But peace never came. For Anna, the war between church and mind would never resolve. She remained, as she had always been, a mystery. Perhaps her voices were demons. Perhaps they were fragments of her broken self. Perhaps they were something else entirely, something no priest or doctor could name. The battle for her soul mirrored the greater battle for human understanding, and in both wars resolution was denied. The legend of Anna Weiss endures not because of the voices themselves, but because no explanation, holy or scientific, ever silenced them. She reminds us that the greatest mysteries are those that straddle the fault lines of belief and knowledge, forever unresolved, forever echoing. The nights were the worst. It was in the stillness when the Bavarian valley sank into silence that Anna's torment came alive. By day, her voices unnerved the villagers, startled priests and puzzled physicians. But by night they transformed her small cottage into a theater of dread. Darkness seemed to magnify the phenomenon, stripping away excuses of coincidence or imagination. Those who dared to linger near her window after dusk swore they witnessed something that defied both reason and prayer. Her parents were the first to experience it. Marcus and Greta Weiss had grown accustomed to the whispers, the sudden outbursts, the strange laughter that escaped their daughter's throat. But as winter deepened, Anna's episodes grew darker, louder, more violent. At midnight, Greta would jolt awake to hear not one but several voices erupting from her daughter's room, overlapping, clashing like a chorus at war with itself. Sometimes they spoke in languages unfamiliar. Sometimes they chanted in unison, creating rhythms that sounded less like human speech and more like ritual. Greta described it as a sound that made the walls tremble and my soul freeze. On several occasions, Marcus rushed into Anna's room to find her sitting upright in bed, eyes wide open yet unseeing, her lips moving rapidly as different tones poured from her throat. One was low and guttural, vibrating with hatred. Another was high and weeping, carrying sorrow too heavy for a child. A third mocked Marcus directly, recalling his private doubts whispered only to his wife. When he shook her, Anna collapsed back onto the mattress, limp and silent, with no memory of what had just occurred. Neighbors began to take notice. The Weiss home, once ordinary, became a magnet for late-night curiosity. Villagers lingered outside, whispering prayers, hoping or fearing to hear the voices for themselves. Many claimed they did. One farmer reported that as he passed by on his way home from tending his oxen, he heard laughter erupt from Anna's window, laughter not of one, but of many. Another neighbor swore he saw shadows flickering across her curtains, even though no candles burned inside. The more people claimed to witness, the more the legend swelled. Soon, families began forbidding their children from walking past the Weiss cottage after dusk. What made the nights unbearable was not just the sound, but the violence that often accompanied it. Furniture rattled as though unseen hands shook it. Chairs scraped across the floor without touch. Crockery fell from shelves. Greta once described entering Anna's room to find her daughter suspended in a posture neither sitting nor lying, as if frozen between movements, her body rigid while her mouth spilled a torrent of voices. Though Greta screamed for Marcus, by the time he arrived, Anna had collapsed unconscious with no explanation for the chaos around her. The villagers' fear ripened into obsession. Some insisted these disturbances were proof of demonic possession. Others believed the child was cursed, her home tainted by forces too old to name. Yet a smaller group whispered a different theory, that Anna was not cursed but blessed, her voice's evidence of divine revelation. For them, the shadows and sounds were not terrors but signs. In her, they claimed, the dead spoke, and the unseen world revealed itself. But Anna herself offered no clarity. By day, she was quiet, withdrawn, pale. She confessed that she did not remember the nights. When her parents asked if she recalled the voices, she shook her head. At most, she described feelings, an overwhelming heaviness, like drowning while awake. She often woke exhausted, her body aching as though she had labored all night. The missing fragments of memory haunted her more than the episodes themselves. "I am told I speak," she once whispered to her mother, "but I do not hear myself." The priests gave names to her voices. The mocking one they called Asmodeus, the sorrowful one Belial, the violent one Leviathan. Each was categorized according to the demonologies that had guided exorcists for centuries. To the church, the distinctions were proof. Demons revealed themselves through character, and Anna's 7 voices represented a legion at war with her soul. They urged her parents to submit to a full exorcism, warning that delay invited damnation. The physicians, however, offered a different vocabulary. They spoke of altars, fragments of personality split by trauma. Each voice, they argued, was a compartment of Anna's psyche, some hostile, some grieving, some protective. What priests named demons they called survival mechanisms. Yet even as they argued for natural causes, the doctors were unnerved by Anna's knowledge, her fluency in tongues she had never studied, her uncanny accuracy in recalling secrets she should not have known. If these were altars, then the human mind was more mysterious than they had imagined. For the villagers, the nights of terror were not philosophical debates, but lived experiences. They heard the screams, the chants, the furniture shattering. They saw Greta and Marcus staggering through the market by day, hollow-eyed and trembling. They pitied the family but also feared them. Some demanded that Anna be sent to an asylum, where walls of stone could contain her darkness. Others demanded that the church intervene fully, exorcising the child before her condition infected the entire village. By the spring of 1816, the Weiss family lived in isolation. Their cottage became both sanctuary and prison. Greta barred the windows at night. Marcus slept with a crucifix under his pillow. Anna grew thinner, her cheeks hollow, her skin pallid. Her 7 voices, once occasional, now visited nightly, each taking its turn. The mocking one taunted priests, spitting scripture back at them. The sorrowful one wailed in tones that broke Greta's heart. The violent one snarled, threatening to tear apart anyone who approached. Others remained quieter, whispering secrets into the dark, words no one could fully catch. It was during these nights that the divide between pity and horror reached its peak. Villagers argued in the tavern, was Anna a victim or a monster? Some insisted she deserved compassion, a child caught in forces beyond her control. Others whispered that mercy was dangerous, that pity allowed the devil to flourish. A few suggested darker measures, banishment, or worse. Fear, when stoked long enough, curdles into cruelty. Yet through it all, Anna remained a child. At times she begged her mother not to let her sleep, terrified of what the night would bring. At other times she wept in confusion, asking why the voices chose her. She never claimed to summon them, never took ownership of the horrors attributed to her. In this way, she was both central to the terror and utterly absent from it. Her innocence became the battlefield upon which fear and belief clashed. And so the nights continued. Each one became a performance attended by witnesses both willing and unwilling. The priests recorded new manifestations. The physicians took notes by candlelight. The villagers whispered from the shadows outside. Anna lay at the center, her small body trembling, her throat channeling voices no one could explain. Whether demons or altars, possession or madness, the effect was the same. A village haunted, a family broken, a child consumed. The legend of Anna Weiss grew in these nights of terror. For every scream that echoed across the valley, for every shadow glimpsed through her window, for every account of overlapping voices that should not exist, the boundary between reality and myth thinned. What began as whispers in a family cottage had become a haunting that no prayer, no medicine, no reason could silence. And perhaps that is why her story endures. Not because of the explanations offered by priests or doctors, but because of the nights when no explanation seemed possible. The nights when voices overlapped, when shadows danced, when furniture rattled without cause. The nights when an entire village stood in awe and horror, knowing they were witnessing something that would outlive them all. The story of Anna Weiss did not end with a dramatic exorcism, nor with a tidy diagnosis sealed in a physician's journal. Instead, it ended in shadows, half-remembered, half-documented, always uncertain. The truth of her fate remains contested. Some accounts claim she was taken to a monastery in southern Bavaria, where monks attempted to quiet her voices with prayer, fasting, and seclusion. Others whisper that she simply vanished, her parents unable to endure the nightly horrors any longer, giving her over to the custody of strangers who spirited her away. No grave marked her resting place. No official record closed her story. She slipped into absence as mysteriously as she had emerged, leaving behind fragments of testimony and an enduring unease. Her disappearance, rather than resolving the mystery, transformed it into legend. In absence, theories bloomed. Each discipline, each worldview, sought to claim her, to fit her into its framework of understanding. The church, the physicians, and the villagers all offered competing explanations, and together they wove a tapestry of interpretations that has survived into the present. But each theory left unanswered questions, like gaps in a manuscript where the ink has faded. It is in those gaps that Anna's story continues to haunt. The psychological theory presents Anna as an early tragic case of what would later be recognized as dissociative identity disorder. According to this view, her 7 voices were not demons, but alters, fractured identities formed by trauma. Though the specific trauma remains undocumented, speculation abounds. Perhaps she endured abuse, whether physical or emotional too, unbearable for a child's mind to face whole. Perhaps the strict piety of her environment, coupled with isolation, forced her imagination into dangerous extremes. The mind, after all, can fracture to preserve itself, splitting into voices that take on burdens the conscious self cannot bear. One voice might hold grief, another rage, another knowledge or memory too terrible to integrate. In this way, Anna's voices could be understood as survival, not possession. Yet the psychological explanation falters in certain details. How, for example, could a rural Bavarian child with little education speak fluent Latin, French, or dialects of German far removed from her village? How could she reveal private sins of those around her, sometimes with uncanny accuracy? Skeptics argue these reports were exaggerations, born of hysteria and gossip. Villagers, eager to confirm their fears, might have heard what they expected, rather than what was said. Memory, shaped by dread, often distorts reality, and yet some testimonies preserved in priestly records insist upon the precision of her utterances. For those witnesses, psychology could not suffice. The religious theory, in contrast, framed Anna as a victim of true demonic possession. To the church, her 7 voices symbolize the 7 deadly sins, each one a force clawing for dominion over her soul. Pride, envy, wrath, sloth, greed, gluttony, and lust manifest not as abstract vices, but as living voices tearing through the throat of a child. Exorcists viewed Anna as a battlefield, her body the ground upon which heaven and hell struggled. The knowledge she possessed, the languages, the secrets, was taken as proof, for demons were believed to hold wisdom both ancient and forbidden. No human child could produce such utterances unaided. This interpretation carried weight in a world where the devil was not metaphor but presence. The villagers, steeped in a faith that saw angels and demons in daily life, found the religious theory most convincing. It aligned with their fears, their scripture, their worldview. And yet even here cracks appeared. If Anna was possessed, why did the exorcisms fail? Why did prayer not silence the voices? The rites, though performed, seemed only to enrage the entities within her. For some, this suggested her possession was too advanced to cure. For others, it suggested something more troubling, that perhaps the church itself had misunderstood the nature of what they confronted. Then came the folklore theory, the interpretation less concerned with medicine or theology and more with memory, rumor, and story. According to this view, Anna Weiss was less a victim of demons or disorder, and more a child swept into a storm of superstition. Her strange behaviors, whatever their origin, were amplified by villagers desperate to make sense of the unknown. Each retelling exaggerated the details. Each witness, consciously or unconsciously, embellished. What may have begun as ordinary illness, fevered delirium, seizures, or even mimicry, became transformed into legend. Over time, the line between fact and story blurred, until Anna ceased to be a girl at all and became a symbol. This folkloric view has its own persuasiveness. History is filled with such tales. Children accused of witchcraft, villagers convinced of hauntings, communities spiraling into mass hysteria. Perhaps Anna was no different, her identity swallowed by the myth, others constructed around her. Yet this theory too falters before the persistent oddities, the languages, the knowledge. The witnesses who swore their experiences could not be explained away as exaggeration. Folklore may account for the spread of her story, but not for its substance. Across these 3 major theories, psychological, religious, folkloric, runs a common thread: incompleteness. None explain everything. Each leaves unanswered questions, as though Anna herself refused to be claimed by a single narrative. She exists instead in the gaps, a figure both real and unreal, both girl and myth. Her legacy is bound not only to the theories but also to the effect she had on those who encountered her. For the church, she became a cautionary tale, a reminder of the devil's persistence. Priests recorded her case in Latin margins, footnotes to the broader war against evil. For physicians, she became a curiosity, an early example of what might later be termed moral insanity or hysteria. Though psychology was in its infancy, her case foreshadowed the debates that would come about the nature of identity, trauma, and the unconscious. For the villagers, she became both warning and wonder, a story to tell on winter nights when the wind howled against their shutters. And so, Anna Weiss lingers. Her name appears in fragments, scribbled notes from priests, medical reports half lost, oral tales carried through generations. In some regions of Bavaria, she is remembered not as Anna but as Das Mädchen mit den 7 Stimmen, the girl with 7 voices. Children dare each other to whisper her name at night, as though invoking her might awaken the voices again. In other places, her story has dissolved into broader folklore, her details merged with other tales of possession, witchcraft, and haunting. She has become less person than archetype, a figure standing at the crossroads of science, faith, and fear. Yet the most haunting element of her legacy is not the voices themselves, but the silence surrounding them. We do not know what became of Anna. We do not know whether she died in the monastery, vanished into obscurity, or endured her voices until the end of her days. We do not even know whether her story unfolded exactly as it was told, or whether time and terror reshaped it beyond recognition. Her absence is the void into which every theory collapses. In that void lies the essence of her legacy. Anna Weiss is remembered not because we solved her, but because we did not. She is a mirror reflecting our deepest anxieties, about the fragility of the mind, the reality of evil, the unreliability of memory. She is the tension between faith and skepticism, between pity and fear, between innocence and monstrosity. To some, she is proof of possession, to others, proof of psychology, to still others, proof of how easily stories grow in the fertile soil of fear. And perhaps that is the final truth. Anna Weiss endures because she resists finality. She reminds us that some mysteries are not meant to be solved, but carried, whispered across centuries, haunting not through answers, but through questions. Was she a child fractured by trauma, a vessel of demons, or a creation of collective imagination? Or was she all three at once? Her story in the end belongs not to science, nor to religion, nor to folklore alone. It belongs to the space between them, the space where uncertainty dwells, where the human need for explanation collides with the human capacity for wonder. It is in that space that Anna Weiss continues to speak, her 7 voices echoing not through her throat, but through the centuries. Anna Weiss remains a question carved into history's silence, a riddle that continues to unsettle both believers and skeptics alike. Was she merely a fragile child caught in the throes of trauma, her mind fracturing into pieces no one in her time could comprehend? Or was she something far more terrifying, a vessel, a host through which entities not her own clawed their way into the world of the living? Every theory circles her like a shadow, yet none ever touch the center. The church's records declared her possessed, her 7 voices nothing less than demonic intrusions. Physicians, still fumbling toward modern psychology, scribbled in their journals that she was ill, the victim of hysteria or moral insanity. And the villagers, trembling in the night, whispered of curses, of witchcraft, of a child who could not be trusted. But through all of these perspectives, one element is conspicuously absent: Anna's own voice. What did Anna think of herself? Did she believe she was haunted or broken or chosen? The tragedy of her story is that the voices drowned her out, consuming her identity until she became only a vessel for others, real or imagined. In the end, Anna was defined not by who she was, but by what she carried. She became a mirror, reflecting the fears and beliefs of everyone around her. To priests, she was proof of hell; to doctors, a living experiment; to villagers, a tale to be retold in whispers for generations. Yet to herself, we can never know. Perhaps that is the true horror, not the voices themselves, but the silence surrounding them. Silence where Anna should have been, silence where her own testimony should have survived, silence in which only speculation now thrives. This silence has kept her alive in memory far longer than she lived in flesh, because silence demands to be filled, and we fill it with our fears. Some say the voices died with her, extinguished when her fragile body gave way. Others, more superstitious, whisper that the voices did not die at all but simply moved on, restless, searching for a new host, waiting for another vulnerable throat through which to speak. And isn't that possibility more unsettling than any explanation we can offer? The idea that the phenomenon was not confined to Anna, but only passed through her, leaving us with the uneasy thought that it could return. Anna Weiss remains unresolved, an open wound in the border between psychology and religion, innocence and evil. We are left with no final answer, only the echo of her voices carried through time. Perhaps that is why her story endures. Not because we understand it, but because we never will. The world does not fear answers. It fears questions that linger, that cannot be closed, that whisper to us still in the quiet hours of the night.